Ah! All right. In 4 seconds, and I'm already yelling. Okay. Hello, everyone. Been a while since the last book reading, but we're back. And today it's going to be the same thing we've been reading. Chapter 5 of How to Raise Your Self-Esteem by Nathaniel Branden. I'll probably have to take off. I don't need to be listening to anything right now. All right. Got it. Okay. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Funny seeing you here, you know? All right. So we got How to Raise Your Self-Esteem, Chapter 5, Liberation from Guilt. I read the first couple of pages, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to read it for people because I don't have to go to therapy for another 45 minutes, and I think I can read it. Be a lot of time it takes. I hope it sounds okay. I hope it doesn't sound too whatever. My ways, but here we go. Wish I could hold it like right here. Block it. Yeah. Our goal is to have a strong, positive self-concept and to be able to maintain it regardless of our expertise or lack of it in any particular area, and regardless of the approval or disapproval of any other person. In moving toward this goal, the way you think about yourself, the standards by which you judge it, and the context in which you see it is vitally important, especially at times when you are inclined to condemn yourself. Guilt, obviously, subverts positive self-esteem. Assessing your behavior entails certain questions like by whose standards do you judge your behavior, your own or someone else's? Do you seek to understand why you acted as you did? Do you consider circumstances, context, the options you perceived to be available at the time? Do you assess your behavior as you would if it were exhibited by someone else? When you think about your behavior, do you identify the specific areas or circumstances in which it occurs? Or do you overgeneralize and say, I'm ignorant, when in fact you may be ignorant of a particular subject and quite knowledgeable about many other subjects? Or say, I'm weak, when in fact you may lack courage, when in fact you may lack courage or strength in a particular area and not in others. If you regret your actions, you attempt to learn from them so that your future behavior does not repeat the same mistakes. All right, this is the part I had to underline. Or do you merely suffer over the past and remain passively stuck in patterns of behavior you know to be inappropriate? The answer to all these questions will have profound implications for your self-esteem. We feel guilt when, contemplating something we've done or failed to do, we experience a diminished sense of self-worth. We feel driven to rationalize or justify our behavior. We feel defensive or combative when someone mentions this behavior. We find it painfully difficult to remember or examine the behavior. Think of some action you have taken or failed to take for which you reproach yourself, something significant enough to have impacted your self-esteem. Then ask yourself, by whose standards am I judging? My own or someone else's? If the standards are not truly yours, then ask yourself, what do I really believe about this issue? And if you are a thinking human being and can honestly and with full consciousness see nothing wrong within your behavior, you may find the courage to stop condemning yourself right at this point. Or at minimum, you may begin to gain a new perspective on the assessment of your behavior. All right, this is stuff I haven't read before. It might be a little choppy. I used to reproach myself, said Lucy at one of our last therapy sessions, because I have never wanted my mother to live with me. I mean, with me, my husband, and our children. I was raised with the teaching that duty to one's parents comes ahead of everything, and that selfishness is a sin. But one of the things I got from therapy was to pay attention to what I really think, rather than what I sometimes tell myself I think. And the truth is that those teachings make no sense to me, especially in light of the fact that my mother always made it plain she didn't particularly like me, and I know I don't particularly like her. We never got along. Her lifelong theme was gloom and doom. She used to tell me something was wrong with me if I was too happy. I looked at the fact that if I allowed my mother to live with us, it would have been hell for me and for my family, so I said no. Now my sisters and brothers don't speak to me. I see life differently than the rest of my family, and it's my life, not theirs. So I'll go by what seems rational to me, and I'll accept the consequences. I'm not suggesting that all values are subjective, and that the moral is simply whatever an individual thinks or feels is moral. I develop my own concept of a rational and objective ethics, an ethics of rational or enlightened self-interest in honoring the self. But people are often intimidated by the value preferences of others, at the expense of their own needs, perceptions, and self-esteem. Further, I am not addressing the problems of psychopaths or people who appear to be lacking in normal guilt responses. If I were, I would have to touch on many issues I do not propose to cover here. In the practice of therapy, much of the so-called guilt we encounter has to do with the disapproval or condemnation of significant others, just parents or spouses. It is not always advisable to take our own or anyone else's declarations of guilt at face value. Often, when someone declares, "I feel guilty over such and such," what he or he really means, but rarely acknowledges, is, "I'm afraid that if mother or father or some other important person knew about what I had done, I would be criticized, repudiated, and often the person does not actually regard the action as wrong, in which case he or she feels is not literally guilt. So the solution to this category of guilt is to heed the authentic voice of the self, to respect your own judgment above the beliefs of others that you do not genuinely share, though you may pretend to. I recall therapy clients who profess to feel guilty over masturbation because when they were young, their parents taught them that it was sinful. Sometimes the therapist solved this problem by substituting his authority for that of the client's parents and assuring that the client that masturbation is a perfectly acceptable activity. But this assumes that the guilt is caused by a mistaken idea about the morality of masturbation. I tend to regard this as the smokescreen problem. The deeper problem is dependency and fear of self-assertiveness. More specifically, fear of challenging the values of significant others. So I work first for a change of the definition of the problem as follows. I do not think masturbation is evil, but I am afraid of the disapproval of my parents. In thus reframing the problem, we have moved out of the arena of guilt and self-reproach. We have given the problem a more accurate and useful definition. And the challenge becomes, am I willing to stand by and act on my own perceptions and convictions? Such willingness is one of the meanings of honoring the self. As a person accepts this challenge, self-esteem rises. Sometimes, protestations of guilt are a smokescreen for denied and disowned feelings of resentment. Thus, I have failed to live up to someone else's expectations or standards. I am afraid to admit that I am intimidated by those expectations and standards. I am afraid to acknowledge how angry I am over what is expected of me. So instead, I tell myself and others that I feel guilty over failing to do what is right. I do not have to fear that I will communicate my resentment and place my relationship with others in jeopardy. If you recognize yourself in this description, the solution to your guilt is to put that in quotations. If you recognize yourself in this description, the solution to your guilt is to be honest with yourself and others about your resentment. First, of course, you must be honest with yourself. Own your anger, admit your resentment at standards and expectations not truly your own, and watch the guilt begin to disappear, although you may still have to work on your struggle for greater autonomy. If I weren't feeling guilty, said Irwin in a sentence completion exercise aimed at exploring just this issue, I'd be feeling agitated. If I weren't feeling guilty, I demand to know by what right my family expects me to support my bum of a brother. If I weren't feeling guilty, I demand to know why I'm expected to carry the problems of other people. If I weren't feeling guilty, I tell them I'm sick and tired of being responsible for a wimp who won't be responsible for himself. If I weren't feeling guilty, I'm not feeling guilty. I'm feeling rage. Then, if I were willing to be honest about my anger, I'd stop saying I feel guilty. If I were willing to be honest about my anger, I'd admit how different I am from the rest of my family. If I were willing to be honest about my anger, I'd feel cleaner and freer. If what I am feeling is not really guilt, said Eunice, an unhappily married woman in therapy, I'll have to deal with my own resentment of my husband's demands that I live only for him. I'll have to face that resentment. If what I'm feeling is not really guilt, I'd admit that I love being back at work again. What I'm feeling is not really guilt. I'd scream about how tired I've been of sitting on my energy so my husband won't feel threatened. Here again, the need for a change is seen in the definition of the problem. Undealt with resentment and fear of self-assertion are the issues that have to be resolved, not guilt. The alleged guilt is merely a means of protecting oneself from this deeper challenge. As you become more honest about your feelings, you give up the need to feel this kind of pseudo-guilt, and then you are freer to think clearly about values and expectations you may need to question and repudiate. As you become more honest about your feelings, you give up the need to feel this kind of pseudo-guilt, and then you are freer to think clearly about values and expectations you may need to question and repudiate. Wait, I literally just said that. Sorry. This task is by no means always an easy one, but if it were, people would not hide behind pseudo-guilt. But if you are willing to make the effort, if you generate the courage to sustain the quest for independence, and you can, the benefit to your self-confidence and self-respect will be virtually immediate. But let us suppose the standards are truly your own, and in some issue you have failed or betrayed them. You have undermined your sense of integrity. As we emerge from childhood to develop our own values and standards, the maintenance of personal integrity assumes greater importance for our self-evaluation. Integrity means the integration of convictions, standards, beliefs, and behavior. When our behavior is congruent with our professed values, we have integrity. Integrity. Mister, you ain't got no integrity. Here is an exercise to facilitate your exploration of this issue. Write down these sentence stems in a notebook and do 6 to 10 endings for each. Number 1, I most feel I have integrity. Awkwardly worded. I most feel I have integrity when I. Number 2, sometimes I diminish my integrity when I like myself most when I like myself least when I fail my standards, I tell myself blank. It would be easier for me to live up to the standards if. But sorry, those are all different. Couldn't help yourself. No, I couldn't. Remember, if you get stuck, invent. Don't tell yourself you can't do it. You can. The only question is whether you choose to. When you have done the exercise, take a few minutes to meditate on your endings. What feelings arise for you? What do you become aware of? What have you learned? It would be helpful to make some notes at this point about what you've discovered about yourself. Okay, so let me just, every time I do this, I usually skip over, so I'm not gonna do that at this point. I feel like I have integrity when I am living by my values, obviously. Well, that's what integrity is. So when do I feel like I have it? I have integrity when I'm independent, when I'm not relying on other people, I guess. Because I value independence, and if I'm always depending on somebody else, how am I supposed to feel, guilt-free? Sometimes I diminish my integrity when I said that, I like myself most when I am goofy and carefree, and I like myself most when I take care of myself. I like myself most when I have friends and I can talk to those friends and not be alone. I like myself most when I am around people. I like myself least when I'm alone. I like myself least when I'm failing at something. I like myself least when I'm reminded of the fact that people don't really want me sometimes. Like, that's when I don't like myself, when I still work for people that tell me, oh, I don't. When I fail my standards, I tell myself that there's different contexts in different places. Like, you do this for yourself, you don't do this for anyone else, It'd be easier for me to live up to my standards if I didn't have to rely on other people and their opinions. I guess it's the big takeaway. So, those are the things. Moving on. When we behave in ways that conflict with our judgment of what is appropriate, we tend to lose face in our own eyes. We tend to respect ourselves less. But if we merely castigate ourselves, vilify ourselves, and think no more about it, we deteriorate our self-esteem and increase the probability that we will have less integrity in the future. A bad self-concept is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It leads to bad behavior. We do not improve by telling ourselves we are rotten. Ouch! Oh my god. We do not improve by telling ourselves we are rotten. Write that down, write that down. It's worth underlining that. Log year, this is like the best chapter yet. Alright, Also, it's been a while since I read this book, so it's probably why it's, good. Our actions are a reflection of who and what we think we are. So we need to learn an alternative response to our defaults that will be more helpful to our self-esteem and to our future behavior. Instead of collapsing into self-damnation, we can learn to ask, what were the circumstances? When did my choices or decisions seem desirable or necessary in the context? What was I trying to accomplish? In what way was I trying to take care of myself? We cannot understand a human being's actions until we understand why the actions make a kind of sense to the person involved. We need to know the personal context in which the actions occurred. We need to know the model of reality, the model of self in the world that lies behind the behavior. For example, suppose I'm a woman who has chosen to remain too long with an alcoholic and physically abusive husband who is dangerous both to me and my children. I know I should leave, but I'm afraid to. I see life as frightening. I see my situation as precarious. And I see my resources and options as extremely limited. Given my basic insecurity, my personal model of self in the world, I am trying to survive, which is not a crime. I can wish I had more courage and confidence and did not suffer from so many anxieties, but I cannot damn myself for trying to live. I can only learn that better ways of living are possible by changing my view of myself and the world. Here is the important fact. If we can look at our personal context with compassion and the desire to understand, without a moment denying the wrongness of our behavior, if we can be to ourselves a good friend who really wants to know where we were coming from when we behaved as we did, then we can heal ourselves. We can feel remorse and regret, but not self-damnation. And the most likely consequence is the determination to do better in the future. This, after all, is the pattern we encourage in therapy. A woman confesses to sexual infidelity. A man admits his perpetration of a rape. You have an amazing public speaking voice. Thank you, Win. On TikTok, I actually teach public speaking. Funny you should mention that. But I really appreciate that. Thank you. I read that. There we go. A woman confesses a sexual infidelity. A man admits his perpetration of a rape. An employee acknowledges embezzling from his company. A teenager tells of willfully hurting a smaller sibling. A scientist admits to faking data. A parent confronts to having been cruelly unmindful of a child's needs. A professor acknowledges taking credit for the work of a student. Oof. A secretary admits to calling in sick so as to have a date with her lover. A columnist confesses to maliciously fabricated gossip. I try to love all and spread positivity. I appreciate that. Me too. By this book, how to raise your self-esteem. I think it's pretty good. Talking about how to love yourself. Some of these actions may be minor, some calamitous in their consequences. But when our clients in therapy speak of them and convey a sense of guilt, what do we do that is healing? Typically, we say something like, "I see that you feel unhappy and self-reproachful about what you did. Let's try to understand why you did it. What were the feelings and considerations that prompted your behavior?" And we explore that. We do not hurl reproaches, and we do not say, "What you did was right. There's nothing to feel bad about." You need to remember that when you act, at some level, you are always striving to satisfy your needs, as it is true of all living organisms. Our actions are always related to our efforts to survive, to protect the self, or to maintain equilibrium, or to avoid fear and pain, or to nurture ourselves, or to grow. Even if the path we choose is mistaken, even if objectively we are engaged in self-destruction, subjectively at some level, we are trying to take care of ourselves. As in the case of the suicide who seeks escape from intolerable pain. However, in seeking to understand the roots of undesirable behavior, there is no implication that the persons involved couldn't help it. Neither understanding nor compassion entails denial of responsibility. In fact, when a wrong has been committed over which a person feels guilt, I direct the client's attention to the question of what actions he or she might take to allow self-forgiveness. Let us examine this point, as it is important. Self-forgiveness may require more than the understanding and compassion indicated above, allowing for the fact that sometimes there are special circumstances requiring special considerations. There are, generally speaking, fairly specific steps we can take to free ourselves from guilt. The first is to own, make real to ourselves, rather than deny or ignore, the fact that it is we who have taken the particular action. The second, if another person has been harmed by our action, is to acknowledge explicitly to that person or persons the harm that we have done and convey our understanding of the consequences of our behavior, assuming that this is possible. The third is to take any and all actions available to us that might make amends or minimize the harm we have done, such as paying back stolen money, retracting a lie, and so on. Of course, there is also, of course, wait a minute, there's another thing, I skipped it. Finally, we need to make a firm commitment to behave differently in the future, because without a change of behavior, we will continually recreate self-distrust. Of course, there is also the step with which I started, the willingness to explore the reasons for our taking the action in the first place. If we evade that, we will not be free of guilt, and we will very likely repeat the pattern of inappropriate behavior. Of course, some crimes are so terrible that self-forgiveness of the kind I am describing here is almost certainly unrealistic or impossible, such as, to name only a couple, the actions of a concentration camp torturer or a mass murderer. But such people are not known to seek psychotherapy or read books about self-esteem. For those of whom this discussion does concern, the evidence is overwhelming that if we can learn to understand and forgive ourselves, our behavior tends to improve. But if we remain relentlessly condemning, however, if we remain relentlessly self-condemning, our behavior, like our self-esteem, tends to worsen. Here's an exercise to help you apply this principle. Write down, clearly and specifically, some action for which you reproach yourself. Why don't you like yourself? Explain why you consider that action wrong. Explain why you consider your action wrong. And close your eyes and imagine that it was not you, but a friend you love who committed the action. Imagine interviewing the friend, drawing him or her out, helping this friend articulate the model of self in the world that was operative, guiding him or her to the perspective and feelings behind this behavior. And imagine giving yourself this treatment. How does it make you feel? What do you become aware of? Record your experience in your notebook. I think about people who just because I reproach myself for investing in a business that isn't mine. And I can think of a friend who would also invest in a person that wasn't his, I guess, a friend. And I'd be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You idiot. And I guess it's like, oh my God, that's how I would talk to myself all the time. I reproach myself all the time. Like, I'm just mean to myself because it's like, what you're doing is wrong. And it's like, well, what you're doing isn't wrong. It's what you think is right. You think it's right to invest in this thing. So then consider this. You would feel it appropriate and desirable to give this benevolent perspective to someone you love. Are you willing to give it to yourself? I wasn't mean to myself. I wasn't nice to myself. Of course, you would not give it to yourself. Chances are you would not give it to anyone else either. When we are irrationally harsh in judging our own behavior, we are usually no less harsh in judging other people's. Ring-a-ding-ding, man. Yeah. Conversely, self-compassion, providing it, is responsible and not merely self-indulgent. Usually results in benevolence toward others. Benevolence, directed towards self and others, is both an expression of self-esteem and an enhancer of self-esteem. Jerry consulted me about a number of personal problems, including a deep sense of guilt over having abandoned his wife and child when he had been married only a few years, and his son was barely 2. That was 15 years ago, and while he had since divorced and remarried, he felt profoundly troubled by the damage he had done, particularly to his son. How do I forgive myself? He asked me. How can I ever make it right? I led him through the process just described, in which he imagined counseling a friend who had done what he had done, and he began to connect with the terror he had felt years ago, the sense of being overwhelmed by responsibilities beyond his power to meet, the knowledge that he did not love his wife and had merely succumbed to her pressure to marry out of an overdeveloped need to be perceived as a good boy, and so on. He did not relinquish the conviction that he could have behaved more honorably and responsibly at the time, but he began to enter into the consciousness of his younger self, and at least to appreciate that he had not been motivated by his cruelty or capriciousness, and that in the universe, as he had perceived it, then he did not grasp the options that were evident to him now. He decided to find his son and former wife, acknowledge his error and understanding of the pain he had caused, accept their right to heap any kind of anger on him they wished, and discovered if there was anything he could do to assist them now. He forgave himself and recognized their right to not forgive him, their right not to forgive him if they didn't choose to. He was free to see their pain with clarity and compassion that was not possible as long as he was preoccupied with self-reproach. And seeing it, he was able to move toward appropriate action. His wife had never remarried, and he was unable to penetrate her wall of bitterness. But with his son, he was able to establish a relationship that was deeply satisfying to them both. After a long and difficult period of suspiciousness, tears, and anger on the part of his son. Wasn't that nice? Guilt and compassion just don't mix well, Jerry said to me. So long as I was thinking about how rotten I was, another part of me was always feeling defensive and self-protective. When I let go of that, for the first time, I could see their side of things in realistic terms. Now, whatever I can do for them, I'm willing and happy to do. And that which I cannot do, I accept and make peace with. One of the worst mistakes we can make is to tell ourselves that feeling guilty necessarily represents some kind of virtue. Intransigent harshness toward ourselves is nothing to boast about. True. It's true. Oh yeah? Well, this is how much I hate myself. It's like, really? That's not a contest. That's really? Jeez. It leaves us passive and powerless. It does not inspire change. It paralyzes. Suffering is just about the easiest of all human activities. Being happy is just about the heart. And happiness requires not surrender to guilt, but emancipation from guilt. And happiness requires not surrender from guilt, but emancipation from guilt. Let us now consider another way in which we can harm our self-esteem by inappropriately assessing our behavior. Sometimes we damage our self-esteem by generalizing about our essential nature on the basis of our actions in particular situations. For example, Martin said to me, "I'm a social misfit. I'm no good at talking to people. I don't know what to say." When I asked, "Do you never know what to say?" he responded, "Well, no. When I'm with people who are interested in art or literature, I have plenty to say." It seems that Martin had no particular interest in sports and felt inadequate when men and women at the office would discuss a recent football game. "Do you care about football?" I asked. He replied, "Not in the slightest." I went on, "Do you think you should care about football?" He reflected for a minute, then laughed and said, "No, of course not." I observed, "When you call yourself a social misfit, what you seem to mean is that you have nothing to say about a subject that holds no interest for you, and that you feel no desire to learn about. To me, that doesn't suggest an innate deficiency. It does suggest that you would be happier if you found some friends who share your interest in art and literature. As for your associates in the office, if you could give yourself permission to have interests different from theirs, and give them permission to have interests different from yours, I imagine you might feel more relaxed around them and might even discover that you're still members of the same species." As an aside to the story, future work with Martin disclosed that both he and his associates at work tended to move in unnecessarily restricted worlds, conversationally, and that plenty of potential avenues of communication existed between them in spite of their different interests. "I'm a coward," said Chester. It seemed that Chester had a fear of public speaking. "What's the difference," I asked, "between saying I'm a coward and saying I feel anxiety at the prospect of speaking in public?" Chester responded, "Your version sort of cuts the problem down to size. I observed that everyone knew who was self-confident in some situations was a good deal less so in others, and that if he wanted to learn confidence in public speaking, he could do so easily, but that universalizing the problem to cowardice accomplished nothing but harm to his self-esteem." "I'm terribly lazy," said Ed, who worked as an air conditioner repair person and was often reproached by his boss for daydreaming on the job. "But I learned that after his daytime job, he worked well into the night on a thriller he was writing, which was the central passion of his life. All his life, he had done everything but what he most wanted to do, and consequently he experienced almost constant frustration and self-dissatisfaction. But he was not lazy. The bit of name-calling did nothing to move him closer to a solution, but merely deteriorated his self-respect. Suppose we say, I suggested that you find it terribly difficult to stay conscientiously disciplined about work that bores you, rather than that you're lazy. Now that's a problem. Hey, it's 12:12, make a wish. Now that's a problem, true enough, if you can't yet earn your living as a writer. But it's not the problem you've been attributing to yourself. You're not lazy when you're writing up until 3 o'clock in the morning and then show up for your job in a fog. The real difficulty here is rough enough. Why make it worse with self-castigation? Now let us think about how you might apply this principle to yourself. Think of some negative attribute you ascribe to yourself. Then think of 3 situations in life where you did not exhibit it. Then see if you can think of any situations in which you actually manifest the opposite behavior. As with the case of Ed, who spent most of his time writing. Do this exercise, preferably making notes, with every negative trait you are inclined to attribute to yourself. I feel negative attribute you ascribe to yourself. Lazy? We just talked about lazy. It's kind of a cop-out. Because that's literally what they just said. It's not lazy. Delusional. I'm investing in a business that isn't mine. And it's like, but your business are people, and you're investing in people, I guess. You're investing in the idea that people are having a good time, and if they see you, like, they want to keep having a good time. They'll pay to have a good time, you know? So that's actually a good thing. That you cause people to have a good time. That's not delusional. What's delusional is thinking that you have to go through life not being happy. And I try to create a happy time for people at my line of work. The next step, and again, the next step, and again, a notebook here is most useful, is to project 3 different alternative responses you might bring to those situations. Try out these new responses in your imagination. See which one you like best, and that fits you best. You didn't pick up the mouth noises, lol, unless you muted your mic. I was surprised too. I think I was just, I do have a lot of filters on my microphone, so that was probably what it was. I was just as surprised as you are. Anyway, I gargled and I like to suck the water through my mouth, even though there's water in your mouth. That's a good way to kind of get the water to like go in your throat. Anyway. The next step, and again, a notebook here, is most useful, is to project 3 different alternative responses you might bring to those situations. Try out these new responses in your imagination. See which one you like best, and that fits you best. Practice seeing yourself manifesting this new, more desirable behavior. See yourself performing your new behavior successfully, then go out and practice what you have rehearsed. It has been well established that this is a proven way to increase our efficacy in the world. If you persevere, even in the face of initial disappointments, setbacks, or relapses, you will discover that you have radically underestimated your power to change, as almost everyone tends to do. Howdy, Mr. Pickle. I'm just reading here. I'm almost done now, and stream's gonna have to end at like 12:30 thereabouts anyway. I'm on page 86, and it's up to page 92. So hate to not answer you on Discord, but this is why. I got 14 more minutes, and I definitely can get this reading done. Anyway, one of the characteristics of people who are reasonably free of guilt is not that they never take actions they regret or feel bad about, or even, for a time, reproach themselves for, but that in addition to the corrective behaviors described above, they seek to learn from their mistakes. They reflect on them, they ponder them, they look for underlying patterns to identify and to avoid. Often, somewhere in our psyche, we may know what we need to learn from our mistakes, but we do not know how to make knowledge fully conscious. Here, sentence completion can be an immense help since it is primarily a tool. Here, sentence completion can be an immense help since it is primarily a tool for gaining access to that which lies within us but beyond ordinary consciousness. Thinking about some action or inaction for which you reproach yourself, write down this sentence stem. If I were willing to look fully at what I did or failed to do, then write 6 to 10 endings as rapidly as possible, without interfering self-criticism or self-censorship, but in effect, allowing the endings to write themselves whether or not they initially seem to make sense. Then proceed with the following sentence stems. When I did what I did, I told myself, one of the things I might learn from the experience is, if I were willing to see what I see right now, one of the ways to avoid this mistake in the future is, if I were to remain as conscious as I am right now, I would like myself more if I, when I act against what I understand perfectly well, I am becoming aware, as I become more willing to understand what I am writing, as I imagine how the future would feel if I behaved more appropriately in the future, as this issue becomes clearer and clearer to me. There is no way to learn how healing and integrating this process can be except by your active participation in it. I will venture to guess that some readers will resist doing this process precisely because at a subconscious level they know the process has the power to activate growth and change, and if they are attached to their errors and to their guilt, change is not what they are seeking primarily, any protestations to the contrary notwithstanding. Why would a person be attached to guilt? Well, for one thing, guilt leaves us locked in our passivity with no need to generate new behaviors. I'm guilty. I'm a disappointment. I have always been. Such is life. This translates to, expect nothing of me. For another, unhappiness is familiar, not enjoyable. But familiar. Who knows what life might confront us with if we didn't have our depression and our self-reproaches to insulate and protect us? Who knows what challenges we might then feel obliged to face? Misery can provide its own kind of coziness, whereas happiness, in its own way, is rather more demanding. In terms of consciousness, energy, discipline, dedication, and integrity. Okay. Then I'm not going to do it for 5 minutes. I'll do it for, I just did it. I wasn't going to, and I'm like, you know what? This one's for you. You know, call it people pleasing if you want, but hey, that one's for you. I actually like voice acting, so the fact that he's interacting, you know, whatever. Then there are the persons who were encouraged, when young, to believe that they were bad or inadequate by unloving or unnurturing parents, and who, even as adults, feel driven to make their parents right, thus protecting the child-parent relationship at the cost of their own fulfillment and self-esteem. This can go on long after our parents have died. The drama is eternal. And it's not like I've been reading the whole thing as Peter Griffin, so it takes courage to work at liberating ourselves from guilt. It takes honesty and perseverance and a commitment to independence and to living consciously, authentically, responsibly, and actively. But it can be done. Why do I feel like I read better as Peter Griffin? I feel like it's because I'm actually paying attention to the words more. Like, it's because I have to, like, actually pronounce them as Peter Griffin would. So, thank you, Pick, for, you know, for not reading I put it in the very beginning of the stream. It'd be different if I, like, put something on the screen that said, no redeems, please, you know, but, yeah, such is life. His challenge confronts us not only in regard to our real or imagined shortcomings, but in regard to our assets. If and when we are inclined to be defensive or self-reproachful about them. When we condemn our thoughts, feelings, or actions, we do so implicitly to protect our self-esteem, even though the effect is directly opposite to what we intend. Since we are striving at some level to take care of or protect ourselves, our policy may have at least a surface plausibility. We are, after all, condemning that which we regard as flaws or shortcomings. But what about the rejection or repudiation of positives, even of virtues within ourselves? We have already seen an example of this in our discussion of self-acceptance, when we noted that people may disown feelings of self-liking or pride through fear of the responsibility these feelings demand, or fear of imagined social alienation or the disapproval of others. But here are some other examples. Some readers will find it difficult to believe that anyone holds such views. Others will recognize them too well. All right, I'm going to go back to my really good books. I think it's been well enough. It's also like, I feel like I'm not taking it seriously, and that's not the point. So anyway. It's almost over anyway. Almost over. Okay. I feel guilty for people being good looking. Thank you for the W, people. And it's okay. If I really didn't want the redeems, I would have put something on the screen. But yeah, I just typed in the beginning, and yeah. It was mostly for the sound alerts. You know, I didn't want to be, you know. Anyway. I feel guilty for people being good looking. Or no, I feel guilty for being good looking. That is, better looking than most people. The implication: my good looks are a reprimand, as well as an injustice to all those who do not possess them. The most likely translation of this implication is, I'm afraid of other people's jealousy or envy. I feel guilty for people being so intelligent, that is, more intelligent than most people. The implication of this is, I was born with a good brain at the expense of all those who do not possess one. Furthermore, since everyone always chooses to exercise such potential intelligence as he or she is born with, I deserve no credit for what I had done with my endowment. The translation of this is, I'm afraid of the animosity of those who resent intelligence. I feel guilty over making a success of my life when so many people fail to. The implication: not only do I deserve no moral credit for my achievements, but they represent an injustice against all those who, for whatever reason, did not achieve equally. Furthermore, I am in the moral debt of all those who have made less of their lives than I have of mine. The most likely translation: if I do not give any indication of feeling proud of what I have accomplished, if I conceal my feelings of pride, not only from others, but from myself, then perhaps people will forgive me and like me. I feel guilty because I am human. I was born in sin. The implication: it is meaningful to speak of guilt in a context where innocence does not exist. Furthermore, I must accept a concept that does not violate to reason and morality because authorities proclaim it. The most likely translation of this is, those authorities hold a monopoly on morality and moral judgments. Who am I to set my judgment against theirs? Two themes seem present wherever we encounter defensiveness or guilt about positives: fear of self-responsibility and fear of isolation or aloneness. Of course, the two are related. But it is unfortunate when the persons are willing to belong to others in order to feel that they belong with them. It is unfortunate when persons are willing to belong to others in order to feel that they belong with them. Damn, that's good. The desire for a sense of community is not, of course, unreasonable. But to attempt to purchase it at the expense of self-esteem is merely to produce a new kind of loneliness for ourselves. This is among the most common sources of human suffering. I'm going to read that one more time. The desire for a sense of community is not, of course, unreasonable, but to attempt to purchase it at the expense of self-esteem is merely to produce a new kind of loneliness. Loneliness for ourselves. This is among the most common source of human suffering. If you feel touched by this issue, if you recognize any part of it in yourself, then I ask you to consider the following. You had a child whom you loved, and that child was beautiful or healthy or strong or intelligent or creative or grew up to be successful. Would you want your child to feel guilty about it? Would you want your child to feel guilty over the fact of being alive? I put the issue this way because in my experience, many people who are confused when thinking about themselves become instantly unconfused when they project their own psychology onto an imagined child. Perhaps I should emphasize that to own and take pleasure in the best within ourselves is not to become arrogant, boastful, or grandiose. Not at all. But neither should we be willing to lie, either to ourselves or to others, about who and what we are. We should not apologize to envy or seek to placate it. Healthy self-esteem forbids that kind of capitulation. So we can see that courage may be required fully, as much for honesty about our assets as about our shortcomings. Here are some sentence stems to help you explore this issue. Number 1. If I have trouble accepting any asset of mine, it might be blank. Number 2. When I feel defensive about positives, blank. Number 3. The scary thing about admitting my pride in myself or my accomplishments is blank. Number 4. When I encounter envy or jealousy. Number 5. If I hide who I am through fear of envy or jealousy, blank. 6. If I am to judge myself sinful just because I exist, blank. 7. If I am asked to apologize for my looks or intelligence or possessions or achievements, circle and direct your completions to the item most pertinent to you, blank. Number 8. If I were willing to admit the things I feel pride about, blank. If you do this exercise in a notebook, writing half a dozen or so sentences, endings for each stem, I will hazard the guess that you do not need further explanations from me about the advantages of honesty accepting your assets, in terms of self-esteem, as well as happiness in general. The emotional rewards will be obvious and immediate. Will you run the risk of alienating any person of low self-esteem who envies success or happiness? Almost inevitably. Does this mean that you may have to reassess some of your relationships? Probably. But as you learn to embrace your strengths, you will attract a new and better kind of relationship. That is a fact of life that, as a psychotherapist, I have witnessed many times. And in some cases, you will redeem a present relationship by inspiring another person to match your courage by rising to your level of honesty and authenticity. As one husband remarked to me, my wife and I agreed to stop playing humble. What a relief. The struggle for self-confidence and self-respect is worth what it asks of us. There is one more related issue we need to address. Our sense of self is not formed in a moment. It has a history. It develops over time. If our goal is to assess ourselves and our behavior appropriately, so as to clear the road to higher self-esteem, we often need to go into the past, the self we were at an earlier point in our personal history, to reconnect with, embrace, and forgive our child self or our teenage self. This is the subject we'll now turn. And the next chapter is chapter 6, integrating the younger self. And that's it, folks. That's going to be chapter 5 of Nathaniel Branden's How to Raise Your Self-Esteem. Thank you to everybody who listened. Everyone who, yeah, that was a really good one. I like that one. Such a good book. Fantastic. Thank you, folks. I appreciate that. And, yeah, maybe I'm going to have to, what I'll do now, I just want to change it to chapter 6, integrating the younger self. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, folks. I guess we could try to find a song to read, because why not? Oh, don't have a good day. Have a great day. Thank you. Well, actually, I probably should just end the stream because I gotta go to therapy. You know what? And I gotta brush my teeth before I go too. We'll raid Lueni real quick. Lueni actually plays Peak, playing Peak right now, so it might be fun. And we gotta get y'all some channel points, especially after that 1,000 channel point redemption. But yeah, we'll raid Lueni. They're playing Peak. Thank you to everybody again. I'll see y'all later. Playing something, watching something, brush them pearly whites. You bet, buddy. Just for you. Raid!
Vietnam Eat Stew just traded with 4 viewers.